Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is to explain also, given the fact that I come from an international NGO which works in India, and my own work intersects urban and labor. So I would look at the informal spaces from within that intersection. The creation of informal spaces and the conditions which create the informal spaces, and therefore what might be the kind of views that we need to take as we move forward. Just to contextualize ActionAid's work in the last 60 odd days since the lockdown started on the 24th of March, we have been in relief operations in about 25 different states, provinces of India. And we have reached out to almost 3 million people on a day-to-day basis with relief supplies and rations and relief supplies. We've also recently just completed a national survey, which included about 11,000 people, 11,000 plus 11,500 people, of people who were in transit, people who are moving from one place to another. So these are the two broad sets of pieces of work within which I'm going to state what I'm saying, which is the current narrative. So I would move a little away from looking at any one spatial area, but to look at the larger, broader kind of context and then bring it down to something which will be helpful for us to have a conversation around. So the announcement itself was something which was sudden, and it was a surprise announcement. And what it hit was the poorest temporary internal migrants, which is estimated at about 100 million, who are engaged in complex, circular, and seasonal routes of migration. And within days of the lockdown announcement, accounts started pouring in of migrants suffering from starvation, fatigue, road accidents, as they started their long, treacherous journeys back into the source states from which they came. Average distances about 500 kilometers of walk during the lockdown, and in some senses, that itself shows you what the lockdown meant for different classes of people across the country. For some, it was staying at home because there was a home. And for some, it was fleeing from what was a temporary home to the shelter of what they thought what was their, permanent home. The experience has been that you've had heavily policed bus terminals within cities. State boundaries were being sealed. There was a fair degree of violence which has been reported in the media, where the internal migrant, and let's be clear, when I use the word migrant, it's internal migrant, and police encounters were largely brutal. The gravity and the cruelty of the migrant crisis came under sort of intense public scrutiny, and it probably is one of the most harrowing experiences since the time that the country went through the partition. The reason why I'm giving you this backdrop is because I think we have to understand also the labor drain that is taking place from very large cities, and therefore the kind of effect it was going to have on informal settlements itself, because the drain itself is causing a change in the nature of informality and informal living that is taking place here. There are those who have fled we don't know how soon they're going to come back or if they're going to come back. The nature of their experience, I mean, most of them have been largely in the construction and other kinds of low-skilled work. The movement of 100 million people inside a country is not a small event. It has a huge impact, and I think that the ways in which our cities would have to respond and the informal spaces would have uh, to understand the gravity of this situation is also going to be something which is of a nature and an order, and that's the more important point which I'm making, of an order which is very different. Um, there have been different states, different provinces in India who have done things uniquely. One of the states, for instance, it's worth mentioning is Kerala, where, for instance, they felt that the need to explicitly reassure people that they would not allow anybody in the state to starve to death as a consequence of the lockdown. The state, for instance, calls the migrants their guest workers. Nomenclature sometimes might be semantics, but quite a bit it does influence the politics. So the way in which that state treated its migrants was very different from the way in which other states did. I'm just giving you one end of the spectrum. There are other states who have also done uh, good work, but it's very important to understand that the experience of those who are what in Action Aid we call the city makers, the ones who actually built the cities and the ones whose labor contributes to the making of the economic model. Their experience of the city has been one of abandonment. They being abandoned at the first sight of trouble. They being abandoned without much of uh, much of thought to what they ought to do. Social distancing norms, while being announced, if you look at the informal settlements, we have an average of about 5 to 6 uh, people in a room. What kind of social distancing norms are possible in that kind of this is an average size. We've been working with, in the national survey, for instance, we've been interviewing people who have been migrating in and out through transit camps, through quarantine camps, and in states where they live and in the states where they are going back to. And in that survey, we are finding that the average uh, the space that a person is occupying in a normal room in a city is about almost 10 people to a room in this kind of a context. And so therefore it's very, very important for us to understand the in the COVID-19 situation, what it has thrown up is that it's completely unmasked the the problem at a very gigantic level. And I think that that also demands of us an imagination of how we look at informal settlements at a scale which is not something that we have dealt with, at least not in India. We have dealt with it in the past. The templates of housing